So, how can being too nice lead to overeating? It might not be something you've ever thought about before. You may not have made that connection, but being too nice or being a people pleaser absolutely is one of those things that leads us to overeating. So let me tell you a little bit more about that. As I was sort of pondering what I wanted to come on and say to you guys today, it got me thinking about when was the first time that I started to demonstrate people pleasing tendencies. And it was definitely when I was very little, and it was with my mum, and it was around food. And you know, if you think from day one of birth, we're being sculpted around what and when we should eat. And I have real vivid memories of me wanting to please my mum and eating up. I had an older sister, and she was really fussy around food. So around the dinner table, it was a time when I could be a good girl and I could please my mum. My mum loved to show her love through food, so I learnt quite quickly if I eat up everything on my plate, my mum's really happy, but also she would tell my sister off and sort of compare her to me and say, you know, why can't you eat your food like your sister does? So being nice or being a people pleaser, you know, is a trait that we learn in childhood, and we've got a number of childhood behaviours that we learn in childhood, but people pleasing is one of them. And being the good girl or being overly nice, I think it's something especially for girls. We kind of grow up with that message that we need to be nice, that we need to put other people before ourselves, and you know, practice that one enough when you're little, and that becomes a very well worn part of our personality. And so when we grow up and we become adults, we have a tendency to be overly nice, and what that often includes is putting other people's needs before our own, not speaking up, not voicing how we're really feeling, certainly not putting our needs even on the priority list. God, if I had £1 for every time I've worked with a client who aren't even on their priority list, let alone anywhere near the top of it. So when you then start to think about what are the consequences of that, what is the impact of people pleasing? Now, don't get me wrong, there is a difference between doing things for other people because it feels nice to do that, and you know, it's part of my value system to be kind and to be supportive and helpful. I wouldn't be in the profession that I am if I wasn't. But equally, I know when that goes over into people pleasing, and people pleasing in this sense is where you are doing things for people when they haven't necessarily asked, when you are the one that plugs the gap all of the time. You know, I have a tendency to be the one that does most of the housework, most of the tasks around the house, and then at times I get really frustrated with Gary that he doesn't do it. But I also know that I set that whole situation and scenario up, and that was very much modelled by my nan and by my mum. All the key females in my life all worked physical jobs but also did everything around the house. So this whole kind of falling into those patterns where we are doing for everybody else, and it's kind of all about, when we start to sort of dig beneath the surface of people pleasing, it's about getting attention, it's about getting recognition, but it's also about avoiding punishment, certainly when we're younger. So these patterns kind of grow with us as we get into adulthood, and before we know it, we are spending our lives doing everything for everybody else. We're not voicing how we're feeling, certainly not in an assertive way. You know, we might get to a point where we're fed up with doing things for people, and we become either indirect aggressive where we moan about it, or we might moan to a friend, or we get sarcastic, but we don't assertively talk about how things are making us feel and come up with solutions. We kind of stay in this it's called the drama triangle actually, where we feel like a victim, and so we then go into persecutor and we moan about what's going on. Or for some of us, we might be a bit more direct aggressive, where we might bang doors, or we might shout or get really angry, but we don't deal with the situations in an assertive way. So how that then ties into food is we have all of this like turbulent emotion going on inside us. And for anyone who can relate to being nice and being a people pleaser, you'll be very familiar with these feelings that we get, these feelings of frustration and exhaustion, that feeling of being invisible and that no one ever does stuff for us, you know. And when we feel like that kind of, we've got a lot of this energy going on that often we don't know what to do with, and food can become a way of just settling that energy and emotion down. But also, when we are constantly giving in our lives and not receiving, that means there's a big hole in us. There's a hole inside us that isn't being met by allowing ourselves to receive, whether that's time or gifts or attention, whatever the thing is. So we have this void, and that's where food can again start to fill that void. And often it's a cycle, because then we feel guilty about eating the food, and that creates another aspect of, it's like links of a chain, isn't it? What triggers something originally leads to overeating, and then the eating triggers another cycle of feeling guilty and ashamed. So that is how, when we're overly nice and when we fall into like these people pleasing traits, it can easily lead to us overeating. So this is why diets only focus on the weight, don't they? It doesn't focus on what's going on behind our reasons for overeating, which is why it's so important to start uncovering what is driving your overeating, and people pleasing and the emotions that go alongside people pleasing and being overly nice definitely have those links into our eating patterns. So have a little bit of a think about that. Where in your lives are you overly nice? Where are you caught up in these people pleasing and the need to keep everybody else happy at the expense of your own needs? And how does that for you link into your eating? Give this some thought, and think about how can you start to redress some of that stuff.